Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon all of you. Good evening to my distinguished scholar next to me, Dr. David Seccombe. He's the kind of person that, the first time I met him was at a church in Tokai. When you meet him, you just like him instantly. Maybe it's the Australian element of his particular character, but certainly we found that particular connection. Just as a prelude, and I hope the chairman doesn't take this into account for the first 40 minutes, the verses that I recited were actually verses or statements, or the prayer the incantation that I stated was something which Moses had recited when he was going to go and communicate the message or the word of God to Pharaoh, or Fir'aun as is known in Arabic, where he states, قَالَ رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي وَاحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِّن لِّسَانِي يَفْقَهُوا قَوْلِي. It might sound like something weird, but it's the Arabic form where Moses is proverbially speaking, and I'll try and paraphrase it. He's suggesting, oh God, remove the impediment from my speech and remove all kinds of barriers that might be before me when I convey my message. And so in that light and spirit, I recite the same prayer that Moses had made when he was addressing Pharaoh. It's good to be here, and certainly it's good to discuss this. We pray that God bless this meeting and shower His particular mercy on us, and we hope, of course, that this debate and discussion continues this fashion in a mutually cordial and acceptable manner for the rest of this evening. What we're discussing tonight is the New Testament, the Holy Bible. I've got here the International Standard Version and the New Testament. But before I go into that, I'd like to bring for your attention. Now, I think if there's all students of theology, and maybe David, as a recommendation perhaps to George Whitfield College, I've got here a textbook which is used at the University of North Carolina. It's called The New Testament, a Historical Introduction to Early Christian Writings. A fascinating work. It's the third edition by Professor Bart Ehrman. At the prelude, and certainly at the outset, he begins with a chapter called The World of Early Christian Traditions. And he speaks about one remarkable life. He says, from the beginning, his mother knew that he was no ordinary person. Prior to his birth, a heavenly figure appeared to her, announcing that a son would not be a mere mortal, but would he himself be divine. The prophecy was confirmed by the miraculous character of his birth, a birth accompanied by supernatural signs. As an adult, he left home to engage in an itinerant preaching ministry. He went from village to town with his message of the good news, proclaiming that people should forego their concerns for their material things of life, such as they should dress and what they should eat. Even after he departed this realm, even though he reportedly predicted the future, he healed the sick, he cast out demons, and he raised the dead. Even after he departed this realm, however, he did not forsake his devoted followers. Some claimed that he had ascended bodily into heaven. Others said that he had appeared unto them alive. Afterwards, that he had talked with them and he touched them. A number of his followers spread the good news about this man, recounting what they had said or had to say about him. Now, if someone were to ask you, and I did this in the typical fashion that a commentator would give a horse race. But if I were to ask, who is this person? Who is this person? Born to a virgin, born miraculously. Who is he? Did many mighty words, many deeds. His enemies trumped up charges against him. He was placed on trial before the Roman authorities. And if I were to tell you, you never heard him, you would say, well, look, I haven't got my facts correct. Just wait for the people to come. So, the question is, who is this miracle working Son of God? And the answer to that is quite clear. It's this individual here. This individual, this man, and this is a quotation by Bartham, and the man I have been referring to is a great Neo-Pythagorean teacher and pagan holy man of the 1st century, Apollonius of Tyana, a worshipper of the Roman gods whose life and teachings are still available for us in the writings of his later works. The follower, Philostratus, in his book, The Life of Apollonius. And Apollonius lived at about the time of Jesus. Even though they never met, the reports about their lives were similar in many respects. Now, this is an individual who has a parallel life to Jesus, as recorded at that particular point in time. I can give you hundreds of other figures of individuals like Sol Invictus. We're not going to deal with that tonight. Mithra and so on, who've got parallel lives to Jesus, and we begin to question and have to scratch our heads. How is it possible that individuals living sometimes hundreds of years, centuries before Christ, had identical biographies in respect of their birth, in respect of their death, as what Jesus had, as narrated and as recorded later on in the further writings and the writings of the Apostolic Fathers and so on. But we'll deal with that as we cross the bridge. Now, at the outset, the New Testament, in fact, it consists of 27 books. I thought David said 22 or 23. It's 27 books by 15 or 16 different Christian writers who are addressing different communities. Now, at the outset, it's important to note and understand that these were not the only Christian writings. There were many others, nor were the Christian writings which we now have as the Gospels were not in existence as the Gospels as we would have them in our form today. You never had the New Testament or the Gospel according to Matthew. You had isolated writings written in different contexts in different parts of the world to different people. I've got here before me a collection called The Lost Books of the Bible. Here you find Gospels such as the Proto-Evangelion, the Jesus' letter to Nicodemus, the Apostles' Creed, the story of Paul and Thecla, and it goes on and goes on. Trallius, the Shepherd of Hermas. The Shepherd of Hermas, which somehow or the other never found itself in the existing New Testament, even though most recently it's existing in the Codex Sinaiticus. We'll come to that later. So as it stands at the outset, you had a whole host of different writings by different people, writing in different times and different contexts, and influenced by the various idiosyncrasies, and they never found themselves in the existing canon as we have it today. For example, and I might just probably amplify this later on, the Apostle Paul refers to an earlier writing that he had sent to the people in Corinth. And he also alludes to an earlier writing that they had sent to him. But you don't find that in the particular writings of Paul in the New Testament. You had the discovery of the Nag Hammadi scrolls in Egypt. I haven't brought my copy along. Discovered in Egypt. You have other non-canonical writings which survive, the writings of the Apostolic Fathers. And recent scholars, generally there's a consensus, and David can correct me if I'm wrong, that most of the scholarship in the biblical world today recognize the New Testament by and large as apologetic pieces. In other words, specifically, not necessarily historical, but more specifically emphasizing a particular theological point written in different parts of the ancient world, particularly to establish a specific view or defense that they wish to have. We're going to deal with the issue called biblical criticism, and the Penguin Dictionary of Religion lists essentially 8 types of biblical criticism. Each type helps us to appreciate the true worth of the particular Bible. Now, it's important to note that when we talk about criticism, we're not going to criticize the Bible. It's basically a positive development, not a negative judgment. It's a positive development, not to find fault with the Bible, but to actually understand it in its proper context. The first type of criticism that normally comes out in biblical scholarship is what we would call textual criticism. Textual criticism, as the particular writing goes out, it defines what was approximately written by the specific authors. One has thousands of manuscripts of both the Old and the New Testament, and one needs to reconstruct what was actually said. Because we don't have the originally signed autographs of the particular writers, so scholars have to basically develop what they believe could have been the original. Then, of course, you have other issues. You've got things like source criticism, where we understand that the inspired authors were the products of their particular environment. So there exists no reason for excluding the possibility that in composing their works, they drew from existing and selective sources. Then, of course, you've got form criticism. Form criticism, where basically helps us to determine the development of the material, to detect the material, how it developed over a period of time through oral transmissions. Another type of criticism is tradition criticism. Tradition criticism helps us to understand how the initial stories change and develop over a period of time. For example, look at the story of the baptism which David mentioned about Jesus being baptized by John the Baptist. And you look at the account in Matthew, and then you go on and you subsequently look at the account in the other Gospels, in Mark and Luke, and particularly from Matthew, and then you look at the account in John. You notice that there is a progressive tendency amongst the later Gospels to minimize the implications of the fact that John the Baptist baptized Jesus. I mean, Mark, for example, had simply mentioned the brute fact without caring for the implications, that the baptizer had an advantage over Jesus. In Mark chapter 1, verse 9 to 11. Luke, for example, writing later, he minimizes mention of the baptizer by using the passive form of the verb to say that Jesus was baptized. Matthew has a baptizer declaring Jesus' superiority. In John's Gospel, John, writing last, has a baptizer at once raising the banner of Jesus and lowering his own. He says Jesus becomes greater, the baptizer becomes lesser. This basically explains why John's Gospel never clearly asserts that Jesus was baptized. You don't have it explicitly stated. Because we see that as we go from Mark to John, the story of the baptism is reshaped to suit the particular time, later needs of the community. And so what must have happened, some scholars assert that Christians may have found the implications of the baptism of Jesus to be at tension with later claims about Jesus' divinity. If Jesus is divine, if he's God incarnate, then what's the need for someone to baptize him? So you can see the later development, that evolution. In Mark's Gospel he's baptized, but in John's Gospel the baptism is never explicitly mentioned. In fact, the baptizer immediately states the superiority of Jesus, which is not to be found in Mark. In Mark's Gospel, there's an inferior position that Jesus occupies. So that's one particular type of criticism. Historical criticism, we won't deal with it at length. And of course, redaction criticism is where you have a redactor taking an external source or basically taking various sources and compiling it and putting it together. Now, we've got a copy of the Bible here called the New American Bible, the New Catholic Translation, and you open the preface. It's sanctioned by the Vatican, and you look at the preface and look at what it says, what the scholars have to confess about the Bible in general and about the Gospels in particular. And this is a quotation they give. What the scholars confess about the Gospels in particular. What did the author of the Gospels do? This is a quotation. In the congregations, mainly in the cities around the Mediterranean, they found scores of narratives about Jesus, the beloved founder of the Christian faith. The writers took these narratives and frequently even remolded and refashioned them to bring out the lesson they wanted to teach. And we do that all the time. Therefore, the four Gospels are not really biographies of Jesus. This is what they say. They are digests of Christian teaching concerning the risen Lord Jesus. A remarkable fact is that for a long time, Christians misunderstood this truth about the Gospels. Regarding the genealogy, they say, the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel is not an absolute true genealogy. First, Matthew took it perhaps from the family of Joseph. Second, the sacred writer refashioned the document to a list of 3 times 14 ancestors, and we'll unpack that as we go clearly. Reading the Gospels, one should therefore distinguish historical facts from theological elaboration. It's difficult to know, they go on, it's difficult to know whether the words of Jesus or the words or sayings attributed to Jesus are written exactly as he spoke them. We as Muslims accept the words of Jesus. We accept the revelation given to him. But they are now telling us that these words may not have been exactly as spoken by him. and so on and so forth. It speaks about the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew was delivered by Jesus while he was on the mount, or was he? Or does Matthew only represent the matter in order to show that Jesus was like Moses who received the law on Mount Sinai? Or was Jesus really on a mountain? Or could this have been a figurative device used by Matthew? And so on and so forth. And of course, this Bible is backed by the Administrative Committee Board of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. They're conservatives, they're not liberals. And it basically has the Nihil Obstat and the imprimatur from the Archbishop of Washington, and also a letter from the Vatican, including a signature from the Pope himself, stating that it guarantees the reliability of that Bible for Catholics. Now, very few people understand what textual criticism is. The textual critic looks at different incomplete manuscripts, and then he rewrites, or he selects or chooses what he thinks is the original. Hence, what we have as the Greek New Testament, and I emphasize this all again, is nothing more than an eclectic edition. Because many people point this out all the time. You know, they point out that, look, as far as the New Testament is concerned, we've got close to 5,000 manuscripts to establish the reliability of it. And the second line of defense is that there's patristic citations. This was something which was theorized and brought into fashion by people like F.F. Bruce and others, people like Norman Geisler and other apologists. But I'll give you something like this. This is a quotation from the New Bible Dictionary, 1978. The material on which textual critics rely upon include other ancient translations into other languages and quotations of biblical passages by ancient authors. And the typical example of that would be St. Jerome himself. About 383 AD, he began revising the Old Latin. This is from Peake's Bible commentary, giving the background on Jerome's Latin Vulgate. He began revising the Old Latin version of the Gospels according to the Greek. He probably revised the other books of the New Testament at the same time. Thus, in the Vulgate, the New Testament is his first revision according to the Greek. And which Greek was this? This was the LXX, the Greek Septuagint. The Greek Septuagint, there was a legend going on that there were about something like 70 Jews, 70 scribes. The Peake's Bible commentary describes them as ignorant scribes that basically wrote the entire Old Testament in Greek in the 3rd century BC. And so Jerome used part of the LXX, or the Septuagint, to compile his existing works together with other particular manuscripts that may have been in his possession at that particular time to compile his Latin Vulgate. But that's one particular example of textual criticism. Now this is what I've got. I've got a list before you showing different manuscript types. You see, you look at the bottom there, and perhaps David maybe want to sit here to have a look at my laptop. I've got here manuscript types here. You've got the total in the bottom, 5,044, 5,364, 5,488, right up till 2005, 5,745. These are the existing manuscripts that you have in the Christian world. The manuscript type, the papyri, uncials, the major uncials like the Codex Vaticanus, the Codex Sinaiticus, the Codex Alexandrinus, the major books, the minuscules, the lectionaries, and so on and so forth. Different types of manuscripts, different types of writings. These are those that are in existence. Sometimes they're fragmentary, sometimes they're scattered, and they're all brought together. And what happens is that you have on the top there, what do you have on the top? I've got on the top the Greek New Testament, the different editions. You've got the Nestle Aland, the United Bible Society's Greek New Testament, Metzger's, Bruce Metzger's Greek New Testament, the one by Vogels, Sota, and so on, various Greek New Testaments. And what do? The compilers of the Greek New Testament make use of all these particular manuscripts, the papyri, the uncials, the cursives, the minuscules, the lectionaries, the talismans, and utilizing that, they compile the existing Greek New Testament. So forget the English. Let's talk about the Greek New Testament. The Greek New Testament is an eclectic edition. At the bottom, you've got there the manuscripts that are used. Out of the 5,745 manuscripts in existence, look at the number of manuscripts that are in use. The most number of manuscripts used are those for the United Bible Society's Greek New Testament, which amounts to no more than 18%. 905, no more than 18% of manuscripts in usage. 905. Others are less than 10%, 5%, 11%, 6%. Why? Why so little? Why such a small percentage? It's because the vast majority of manuscripts don't tally with each other. No two are exactly identical. So what you basically have then is that you have a situation where, let's assume each and every single person here wrote a summary of what happened at this particular meeting. 1,000 years later, we find all fragments of different people's writings here, and no two can be found to be identical. What would I do? If I want to compile an entire summary of what took place today in 2009, what I would do is I'd look at all those particular writings which would be the closest to each other. And that's what they do here. So you've got 5,745 manuscripts in 2005, but the percentage of manuscripts used to construct the New Testament are less than 10% in most instances, sometimes 10%, because the majority are not the same. In fact, the New Testament manuscripts are normally classified what we would call as the kind of style of writing. They call either the Alexandrian style, the Western style, the Caesarean or the Byzantine style. With regards to the Greek New Testament, the manuscripts that are available, some 80 to 90% of the manuscripts represent the Byzantine or the majority text style of writing, which dates after the 9th century. And that's universally considered to be the worst text type, almost universally considered to be the earliest attainable text type of the New Testament, but probably in its most worst format in terms of the writing and style. These are the kind of, this is what they'll probably find. I mean, you'd have, for example, in the British Museum, or, even things like the Chester Beatty Papyri, and so on and so forth, but they're fragmentary. The major uncials date later after the 4th century, 3rd century, 5th century, containing the complete New Testament. And there too, there are many variances. Harry Gamble from Yale University stated that copies about adulteration of texts are fairly frequent in early Christian literature. A great deal of early Christian literature was composed for the purpose of advancing a particular viewpoint amid the conflicts of ideas and practices that repeatedly arose within and between Christian communities. Any text was liable to emendation, changing, in the interest of making it serviceable in a situation of a theological controversy. So in other words, if there is a controversy that arises on a particular dogma, if you can have a text which establishes your position, then in a sense, even if it amounts to amending it or trying to manipulate it in the sense of emphasizing this particular point of view, then that is normally done. And this is it. This is what you have. This is a committee of the Bible Society's Greek New Testament. You've got people like C.M. Martini, Kurt Allen, Wickren, the late Bruce Metzger. He's a gentleman with the spectacles on. And what are they doing? They're constructing the New Testament. They're constructing the Greek New Testament. It might sound like something novel, but if you look at the back here on the notice board, on the board, the chalkboard, they've got certain letters, A, B, C, D, E, F. What does that signify? It signifies that certain aspects or certain verses, certain manuscripts are, there's some kind of unanimity across the board. Some of the verses are sound. B signifies there might be a certain doubt. C, there might not be an entire